In the heart of the ancient world, one man rose from obscurity to become the most powerful figure in Rome. His name is known throughout history, Julius Caesar. But his rise to power was not forged merely through military might. It was shaped by a far more dangerous force, psychological manipulation. In the art of war, Caesar was unmatched, but it was his mastery of the human mind, his ability to manipulate, to control, and to bend others to his will that set him apart. Alliances were formed not from trust, but from necessity. Propaganda became his weapon, shaping the world's perception of him. And with each calculated move, he inched closer to absolute control. This is the story of a man who, through brilliance and ruthlessness, reshaped the destiny of Rome, and in doing so, changed the course of history forever. This is the story of how a master of military strategy and psychological warfare ascended to the very heights of power, and how his ambition would ultimately bring about his greatest betrayal. Act 1. The early years of Julius Caesar, rise through Roman society and psychological tactics. In the heart of Rome, a city where ambition often eclipsed virtue, one man would rise above the chaos, rewriting the rules of power. His name would strike fear into the hearts of his enemies, yet inspire loyalty in his followers. A name that would become synonymous with the might of the Roman Empire, Julius Caesar. But how did a young man, born into a fractured political landscape, claw his way to the very pinnacle of power? How did he use not just his military genius, but his understanding of the darkest corners of human nature to manipulate and control those around him? This is the story of Julius Caesar's rise, a story of ambition, ruthlessness, and the psychology of power. Scene 1, Caesar's early life. Born in 100 BCE, Gaius Julius Caesar was not born into wealth or military glory. His family, the Julii, were old nobility but had fallen from the heights of power. Yet Caesar was different. From a young age, he understood that in Rome, power was not simply inherited, it was seized. His father, Gaius Julius Caesar, died when Julius was only 16, leaving him with a precarious position in a volatile republic. He was left with nothing but his wits and a desire for something greater. The young Caesar had the gift of charisma. He could talk his way into a room and make people listen, make them believe in his vision. But there was something more, something darker, lurking beneath his charm. A cold ambition that would stop at nothing to achieve greatness. At the age of 18, Caesar made his first significant move, marrying Cornelia, the daughter of a prominent politician, Cinna. It was a calculated move, a political alliance. But the marriage was more than that. Cornelia's father was a key supporter of Gaius Marius, a powerful general who opposed the dictator Sulla. Caesar, now entwined in a political marriage, had already placed himself in a dangerous game. Scene 2, first political conflict. The power struggle in Rome was violent, filled with betrayals and shifting alliances. In 82 BCE, when Sulla returned to Rome after a victorious campaign in the east, he purged his enemies ruthlessly. Caesar, with his family's Marius connections, was on his list. Forced to flee Rome, Caesar would learn the first crucial lesson in his rise to power: survive at all costs. He would not let his family's enemies erase him. Even in exile, Caesar was laying the groundwork for his future return. He traveled to Asia Minor, where he served as a military officer. But his most significant move came when he was captured by pirates during a naval campaign in 75 BCE. The pirates demanded a ransom, a huge sum that Caesar easily paid. But it was how he handled the situation that left a mark on his character. Instead of fearing them, Caesar saw the pirates as mere pawns in a game of power. He mocked them, telling them that once freed, he would return to crucify them, a statement that, at the time, seemed ridiculous. Yet when Caesar returned, he did exactly that. He hunted down the pirates, seized their ships, and had them crucified. This moment, this ruthless act, marked the first of many in Caesar's life, where psychological manipulation played a key role. He would never just settle for victory. He would make sure his enemies feared him. and he would make sure his reputation was one of utter dominance. Scene 3. The rise in politics. By the early 60s BCE, Caesar had returned to Rome and embarked on a rapid political rise. His charm, his ability to read people, and his undeniable ambition made him an attractive figure in the political chaos of Rome. But Caesar did not just rely on his talents. He understood the power of public perception. He sought the consulship, the highest elected office in Rome, and in 60 BCE, he formed an alliance with two of Rome's most powerful men, Pompey, the military hero, and Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome. Together, they created the first triumvirate, a political machine designed to control Rome's political landscape. But it wasn't just about mutual benefit, it was about psychological manipulation. Caesar knew that alliances were fragile, that power was fleeting, and that he needed to control the narrative. In this political arena, perception was everything. Caesar masterfully manipulated the people in the Senate, playing each faction against the other. In the next few years, Caesar would expand his influence, not just through political deals, but by leveraging his growing military command. He understood that a general who could win victories would command loyalty and fear in equal measure. And as he headed to Gaul to wage war and expand the Roman Empire, he knew that his greatest weapon was not his army. It was his understanding of the human psyche. Scene 4. Conclusion of Act 1. Julius Caesar's early life was not defined by mere luck or fortune. It was defined by his understanding of human nature, his ability to manipulate those around him, and his willingness to use ruthlessness as a tool for power. From his early years in Rome to his first political battles, Caesar displayed a mastery of the psychological game that would shape his entire career. But the story of his rise was far from over. In the next act, we'll explore how Caesar used his military genius and psychological manipulation to build an empire, one battle at a time. End of Act 1. The greater the difficulty, the more glory in surmounting it. Skillful pilots gain their reputation from storms and tempests. Epictetus. Act 2. The rise to political power, propaganda, alliances, and military strategy. Julius Caesar had survived the early years of political intrigue, exile, and military campaigns. But survival was never his goal. It was merely the first step. Now he sought power, and he would wield it not just through military conquest, but through calculated political maneuvering, clever alliances, and above all, psychological manipulation. By the early 60s BCE, the Roman Republic was crumbling under the weight of corruption, class struggles, and ambitious generals. The Senate, once the cornerstone of Roman political power, had become a place of infighting, backstabbing, and dysfunction. Into this chaos, Caesar stepped, ready to play the political game in a way no one had ever seen before. Scene 1. The formation of the first triumvirate. In 60 BCE, Caesar recognized that the key to power was not just in gaining support from the people, but in controlling the most influential men in Rome. He knew that alliances were not just about friendship. They were about leveraging power and manipulating perceptions. Caesar formed a secret alliance with two of Rome's most formidable men, Pompey Magnus, the military hero of the East, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome. Together, they formed the first triumvirate, a political coalition that would dominate Roman politics for years to come. But Caesar knew that this alliance was fragile. Pompey and Crassus were rivals themselves. He understood the importance of balancing these men's egos and ambitions, using them to further his own goals. Caesar's genius lay not in his ability to simply strike deals, but in his understanding of how to manipulate those around him. With Pompey, Caesar capitalized on the general's desire for political influence after his victories in the East. With Crassus, Caesar offered military support in exchange for financial backing and access to Rome's wealthiest circles. To the Senate and the people of Rome, this triumvirate seemed like a natural alliance of powerful men. But behind the scenes, Caesar carefully maneuvered, ensuring that his power was always growing. He controlled the narrative, positioning himself as the bridge between Pompey's military might and Crassus's wealth. In reality, Caesar was the true architect of the triumvirate. Scene 2. the use of propaganda and public support. Narrator. In Rome, the Senate held nominal power, but the true power lay with the people. And Caesar understood that the key to controlling the masses was through public image. He used propaganda not just as a tool for gaining power, but as a weapon to control the narrative. One of the most brilliant moves in Caesar's political rise was his use of public spectacles, games, triumphs, and lavish banquets to secure popular support. He knew that in the eyes of the common people, a ruler was only as powerful as their ability to entertain and distract. So Caesar threw lavish public games, the likes of which had never been seen before, and held a series of spectacular triumphs to celebrate his military victories. But these were not just celebrations. They were a carefully orchestrated display of power. Caesar understood the psychology of crowds. A well-fed, entertained populace was a loyal one. With each event, he cemented his place as the champion of the people, making himself a figure of admiration and affection. More than that, Caesar's control over the political narrative was reinforced by his ability to communicate. Whether through speeches, letters, or even his own writings, he carefully crafted his image as a man of the people. His Commentari de Bello Gallico, written after his campaigns in Gaul, would serve as an epic propaganda tool, recounting his military genius and portraying him as Rome's greatest hero. Scene 3. Military campaigns. The conquest of Gaul. But no amount of political maneuvering could elevate Caesar above his rivals without military success. He knew that the key to absolute power in Rome was through command of the Roman legions, and Caesar was a master of military strategy and psychological warfare. In 58 BCE, Caesar was appointed governor of Gaul, a province that was strategically important to Rome's security. But Caesar saw Gaul not as a duty, but as an opportunity to expand his power and influence. His military campaigns in Gaul would not only increase his wealth and status, but they would serve as a platform for his future political ambitions. What made Caesar's military campaigns so effective was not just his tactical brilliance, it was his ability to manipulate both his enemies and his soldiers. Caesar was an expert at using psychological tactics to control his troops. He kept them loyal by offering rewards, sharing in the hardships of battle, and most importantly, cultivating a sense of camaraderie and duty. Caesar was not a distant general. He fought alongside his men, earning their respect and devotion. To the Gallic tribes, Caesar was a ruthless conqueror, using both military might and strategic alliances to crush those who resisted Roman rule. His brutality was well known, but so was his cunning. He used psychological tactics to divide and conquer, playing on the weaknesses of his enemies and exploiting their divisions. One of the most famous examples of this was his conquest of the Gauls, which took years but was ultimately a success through a series of decisive battles, most notably the Battle of Alesia in 52 BCE. Caesar's brilliance in Gaul was not just in his tactics, but in his ability to turn defeat into victory, to create a mythic narrative around his actions. His victories were celebrated back in Rome, portrayed as a triumph of Roman will over barbarism. In reality, Caesar used these victories as stepping stones to elevate himself to the role of Rome's greatest general and to outshine his rivals in the Senate. Scene 4. Political manipulation, turning the tables on rivals. As Caesar's military successes mounted, his political position in Rome grew stronger. His rivals, particularly Pompey and Crassus, began to grow wary of his rising influence. Caesar's alliance with Pompey had already started to strain, as both men's ambitions clashed. Pompey, feeling sidelined by Caesar's success, sought to take more control over the Roman political scene. But Caesar had already anticipated this. In 49 BCE, Caesar faced his greatest challenge. Pompey, backed by the Senate, demanded that Caesar relinquish command of his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar, ever the master of psychological tactics, knew that this was a challenge he could not back down from. To do so would be to lose everything. The famous crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BCE marked the point of no return. Caesar's army, loyal to him above all else, marched toward Rome. The die is cast, Caesar is said to have remarked. It was a declaration of war, not just on Pompey, but on the entire Roman political system. It was also a declaration of Caesar's willingness to sacrifice everything, his reputation, his career, his life, just to seize power. By crossing the Rubicon, Caesar was not just defying Pompey and the Senate. He was manipulating the situation to his advantage. Knowing that Pompey would hesitate, knowing that the Senate would be caught in a state of indecision, Caesar's willingness to take this bold step reflected his understanding of human nature, how fear, indecision, and hesitation could be exploited to secure victory. Scene 5. Conclusion of Act 2. Through military conquests, strategic alliances, and brilliant propaganda, Julius Caesar transformed from a skilled politician to a warlord of unparalleled ambition. His rise was not just about battles won, but about psychological manipulation of the Senate, of the people, and even of his closest allies. By the time Caesar crossed the Rubicon, the world was watching, and it would never be the same again. But Caesar's journey was far from over. In the next act, we'll delve into his final push for supreme power in Rome, his civil war with Pompey, and his ultimate victory that would change the course of history. End of Act 2. He who is brave is free. Seneca. Act 3. The conquest of Gaul, manipulating public opinion and building an empire. By the time Julius Caesar had returned from his military campaigns in Gaul, his name was already synonymous with victory. His reputation as a brilliant general and ruthless conqueror was unrivaled. But it was not just his military might that had won him the loyalty of his soldiers and the admiration of the Roman people. It was his ability to manipulate public opinion and craft a narrative of triumph that portrayed him as Rome's savior. In the chaos of war, Caesar recognized an opportunity to solidify his power, not just through victory, but through the creation of a myth. And with each campaign, each conquest, Caesar used his genius to control the perception of his deeds, ensuring that his enemies in Rome were powerless to stop him. Scene 1. The Gallic Wars, the master of strategy. In 58 BCE, Caesar launched a campaign in Gaul that would last for nearly a decade. The Gallic Wars were not merely a military conflict, they were a psychological campaign, a way for Caesar to prove not only his tactical brilliance, but also his mastery of human nature. Caesar understood the power of fear, loyalty, and propaganda. Each battle, each victory, was a carefully calculated move that would secure his legacy and bolster his influence back in Rome. The Gallic tribes were divided, each with their own leadership and varying degrees of resistance to Roman rule. But Caesar used this to his advantage. By exploiting the fractured political situation among the Gauls, he played one tribe against another, striking at the most vulnerable moments and presenting himself as a unifier, a force of order amidst chaos. Even in the midst of brutal war, Caesar kept his soldiers in line with promises of plunder, rewards, and the glory of Roman victory. One of his most famous campaigns was the Siege of Alesia in 52 BCE. Surrounded by a coalition of Gallic forces and facing overwhelming odds, Caesar turned the tide of the battle with a masterstroke of military genius. He constructed massive fortifications around Alesia, trapping the Gallic forces inside while also fending off reinforcements attempting to break the siege. The Gauls, led by Vercingetorix, surrendered in the face of Caesar's superior strategy, marking a decisive moment in the conquest of Gaul. Scene 2. Manipulating public perception. The power of propaganda. Caesar's brilliance was not limited to the battlefield. He knew that winning the war in Gaul was only part of the equation. The true victory lay in how the events were perceived in Rome. To the Senate and the people, Caesar's conquests needed to be framed as a triumph for Rome. But Caesar was not content to simply let his victories speak for themselves. He meticulously crafted the narrative through his Commentari de Bello Gallico, a series of writings in which he chronicled his campaigns. These writings were more than just military reports. They were propaganda designed to glorify Caesar's accomplishments while downplaying the challenges and defeats. By presenting himself as a hero of the Roman people, Caesar cultivated an image of a man who had brought civilization to the barbaric tribes of Gaul. Through this, he captured the public imagination, making himself a beloved figure not only in Rome, but across the Roman Empire. The brilliance of Caesar's propaganda lay in his ability to shape the story of his military campaigns in such a way that his enemies had little room to challenge his narrative. Even his most brutal actions, such as the massacre of the Gallic forces at Alesia, were portrayed as necessary for the greater good of Rome. Caesar had turned war into an art form, and he had mastered the psychological warfare of perception. Scene 3. The growing power and influence. By 50 BCE, Caesar had become not only the most powerful military leader in the Roman world, but one of the most influential figures in Roman politics. His conquests had filled his coffers and provided him with immense wealth, but it was his ability to leverage that wealth and power that truly set him apart. Back in Rome, Caesar used his newfound influence to secure his political ambitions. Through bribes, promises, and careful manipulation, he garnered the support of the plebeians, the common people, who were increasingly drawn to his image as a man of action. But Caesar was not content with simply amassing power through military and political means. He understood the importance of timing and momentum. He had successfully established himself as Rome's greatest general, but to seize ultimate power, he needed to control more than just the military and the masses. He needed to control the Senate. Scene 4. The Endgame, Crisis in Rome. The Roman Senate, however, was not pleased with Caesar's growing power. His political rivals, most notably Pompey, feared that Caesar was becoming too powerful to control. The Senate, in 50 BCE, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. To many, this was a direct challenge to Caesar's authority. For Caesar, it was an ultimatum he could not accept. His loyal soldiers, who had fought by his side in Gaul, would never abandon him. For Caesar, this was the point of no return. He knew that crossing the Rubicon River into Italy with his army would mean war, civil war, but he also knew that to turn back would mean the end of his dreams of supreme power. As he uttered the famous words, "The die is cast," he was declaring not just a war on Pompey and the Senate, but a war on the old order of Roman politics itself. Scene 5. Conclusion of Act 3. Caesar's conquest of Gaul had been more than just a military campaign. It had been a calculated move to solidify his power, manipulate public opinion, and ensure his future political ambitions. Through his military genius, his use of propaganda, and his understanding of the psychological dynamics of power, Caesar had positioned himself as the most powerful man in Rome. But his greatest challenge was yet to come. In the next act, we will follow Caesar's final push for total power, his crossing of the Rubicon, the civil war with Pompey, and his ultimate victory that would change the course of Roman history forever. End of Act 3. Man is not worried by real problems so much as by his imagined anxieties about real problems. Epictetus. Act 4. The final push for supreme power. The civil war and victory. The Rubicon had been crossed. Julius Caesar, the man who had conquered Gaul, had set his sights on Rome itself. The Senate, now powerless to stop him, watched as Caesar marched his army into Italy. The civil war had begun, and with it, the final phase of Caesar's brilliant and brutal rise to absolute power. But this was no longer just a political struggle. It was a war of survival. Caesar knew that to secure his dominance, he would need to decisively defeat Pompey, his former ally turned bitter rival. Pompey, supported by the Senate, would not surrender without a fight. What would follow would be a clash of titans, one that would change the fate of Rome. Scene 1. The Civil War begins. As Caesar's army crossed the Rubicon, Pompey and the Senate scrambled to prepare for battle. Pompey, with his seasoned legions, retreated to the south, hoping to gather more forces. Caesar, undeterred, swiftly advanced toward Rome. His army, loyal to him above all else, followed without question. Caesar knew the psychological impact of this war. If Pompey's forces hesitated even for a moment, victory would be his. Caesar's first victory came swiftly as he entered Rome, where Pompey's forces had fled. With Rome under his control, Caesar now faced the task of engaging Pompey's army in a decisive battle. It was not just a military conflict, it was a psychological showdown. Caesar had to demonstrate to his soldiers, to the Senate, and to the people of Rome that his ambition would stop at nothing to see him rise to power. Scene 2. The Battle of Pharsalus. The decisive moment came in 48 BCE at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece. Caesar, with a smaller force, faced Pompey's much larger army. Pompey's forces were confident, most of them had fought in Rome's greatest wars. But Caesar, ever the strategist, knew how to exploit the psychological weaknesses of his enemy. He had already broken Pompey's morale with swift victories in Italy, and now he used every trick in his military playbook to win. Caesar's forces, though outnumbered, were more cohesive and more loyal to him than Pompey's. Pompey, in a fatal mistake, underestimated Caesar's tactical brilliance. The battle was a resounding victory for Caesar, and Pompey fled to Egypt, where he would be assassinated by agents of the Egyptian king. Scene 3. Caesar's dictatorship and psychological manipulation after Pompey's death. Caesar stood alone at the pinnacle of Roman power. He was declared dictator for life in 44 BCE, a title that would forever change the nature of the Roman Republic. But Caesar's rise was not just due to his military victories, it was his ability to manipulate the hearts and minds of those around him. Caesar's psychological tactics extended to the Senate, where he played a delicate game of power. He showered the Senate with gifts, land, and titles, all the while maintaining the image of a benevolent ruler. He was not a king, he insisted, but a servant of the Roman people, and the people adored him. Scene 4. The assassination plot. But Caesar's power came with a price. His absolute control, the very thing that made him invincible, also made him vulnerable. A growing conspiracy within the Senate, led by men like Brutus and Cassius, plotted to end his reign. They feared that Caesar's ambition would spell the end of the Roman Republic and its transition to monarchy. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated in the Senate House. It was the ultimate act of betrayal by those he had trusted. The man who had risen to power through military genius, propaganda, and psychological manipulation was struck down by the very forces he had once controlled. Conclusion of Act 4. Julius Caesar's life and death mark one of the most dramatic chapters in the history of Rome. Quote, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself. To be conquered by yourself is of all things most shameful and vile." Plato. Julius Caesar's life was a tale of ambition, military genius, and unparalleled psychological manipulation. From the early years of strategic alliances and calculated public image building, to his conquests across Gaul and the ultimate clash with Pompey, Caesar carved his name into the annals of history. His manipulation of public opinion, his brilliance on the battlefield, and his mastery of psychological warfare allowed him to rise to power like no other before him. Yet despite all his triumphs, Caesar's legacy is bittersweet. His ambition, which had fueled his every move, was ultimately his undoing. His assassination by those closest to him, men he trusted, men who feared his unrelenting grasp on power, was the tragic end of his grand vision for Rome. In many ways, it marked the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the empire. Scene 1. Reflection on Caesar's methods. Narrator, VO. What made Caesar so extraordinary was not just his military genius, but his understanding of human nature. He was a master of psychological manipulation, knowing how to bend others to his will. Whether it was through the careful cultivation of alliances, the use of propaganda, or his ruthlessness on the battlefield, Caesar knew that power was never just about force, it was about control, perception, and influence. He understood that leadership was not merely a title, but a carefully crafted image that resonated with people's desires, fears, and ambitions. He manipulated his enemies, his allies, and even his soldiers into believing in his vision, which allowed him to conquer not just lands, but the hearts and minds of those around him. Scene 2. The end of the Republic and the dawn of empire. Narrator, VO. Caesar's reign, though short-lived, set in motion the events that would transform Rome from a republic into an empire. His assassination did not end the power struggle. Rather, it paved the way for the rise of his adopted heir, Octavian, who would become Augustus, the first Roman emperor. In his death, Caesar became a martyr for many, a symbol of the idea that power in Rome was no longer to be entrusted to the Senate, but to the one who could seize it with force and cunning. The Republic, which had survived for centuries, was no longer capable of sustaining the level of power required to rule the vast expanse of territory Caesar had conquered. Thus, Caesar's assassination only marked the beginning of a new phase in Roman history. His name would live on as a symbol of absolute power, and his life would be dissected and analyzed for centuries as a model of political ambition and manipulation. Scene 3. Legacy of Power and Psychological Manipulation. Narrator, V.O. Julius Caesar's influence extended far beyond the borders of the Roman world. His legacy would echo through history, from the monarchs of the Middle Ages to modern political figures, each drawing inspiration from his tactics of psychological warfare and his ability to manipulate public opinion. Whether in the battle for political supremacy or in the rise of authoritarian regimes, Caesar's methods are still studied by leaders, politicians, and historians alike. But beyond the military campaigns and political machinations, Caesar's story is a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition. His manipulation of those around him, his relentless pursuit of power, and his disregard for the established order left Rome in turmoil. In the end, his vision for Rome's future was realized, just not in the way he had intended. Scene 4. Modern-day parallels. Even today, Caesar's rise to power offers a valuable lesson in the pursuit of dominance. In the modern world, we see echoes of Caesar's tactics in the lives of political figures, corporate leaders, and those who seek to control the narrative. Caesar's story is a timeless one, illustrating the power of charisma, manipulation, and psychological insight in shaping the world. In a world where media, influence, and power are intertwined, Julius Caesar's life is a reminder that the game of power is still played with the same tools he used centuries ago. The stakes may have changed, but the fundamental principles of control, manipulation, and ambition remain constant. Julius Caesar's life was one of extraordinary ambition and audacity, a man who defied the odds, manipulated the political and social structures of Rome, and ultimately changed the course of history. He will forever remain a symbol of the dangerous allure of power and the psychological tactics that can propel a man to the heights of greatness or bring him to a violent end. For in the end, Caesar's story is not just one of military conquests or political triumphs. It is a story of how the pursuit of power can transform a man and an empire forever. And so, we are left with one final question. Can a man who masterfully manipulates the world around him ever truly control his own fate? Or is it the forces of history, ruthless and unpredictable, that ultimately decide his destiny? What does not kill me makes me stronger. Friedrich Nietzsche. End of documentary. Julius Caesar's story is one that transcends time, an epic tale of ambition, power, and the psychological tactics that reshaped an empire. His brilliance on the battlefield, his manipulation of the masses, and his ruthless drive to control the destiny of Rome echo through history, leaving a legacy that has influenced not only politics, but the very nature of leadership itself. But his story is also a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of absolute power and the cost of unchecked ambition. Caesar's rise and fall are as relevant today as they were in the ancient world, offering us a glimpse into the psyche of those who would seize control and the consequences they face. In the end, we are left with a simple truth. Power is never given. It is taken. And how it is taken and what is sacrificed along the way can change the course of history. If you found this journey into the life of Julius Caesar fascinating, and if you want to explore more untold stories of history's greatest leaders, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. We also want to hear from you. What do you think? Did Caesar's manipulation of power make him a genius, or was it his downfall? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation. And if you enjoyed this documentary, share it with others who might be just as intrigued by the power dynamics of history's greatest empires. Until next time, remember, history is not just a collection of facts. It's a mirror that reflects the world we live in today.